go again. My name is Judy Shipman, which is not really important for you to know. It is my pleasure to introduce Brooks Johnson, who I have known for many, many years, but we aren't going to go into that either. But somebody see me afterward, I'll tell you about that. Brooks Johnson is a licensed mental health counselor who has worked in the counseling field for over 20 years. He was awarded his BA in psychology from Auburn in 1994 and his Master of Science in Counseling and Psychology from Troy State University in 2003. For 9 years, Brooks worked as the clinical director of the Alzheimer's Project after completing a 1-year internship at the Tallahassee Memorial Healthcare Memory Disorders Clinic. That's one of the things you can ask me about. Brooks is a licensed mental health counselor and a certified dementia trainer for assisted living facility staff in the state of Florida. He has also worked in the fields of adult mental health and juvenile corrections, and currently Brooks spends his days attempting to manage the behaviors and mental health of inmates at the Wakulla County Jail. And he also does a heck of a good Elvis Presley imitation.
It's better if you can see it.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I would not be a licensed mental health counselor if it weren't for Judy, because she was my supervisor for, I don't know, probably 4 years or something like that. Probably what should have been 2, but was 4. Thank y'all for coming in. I see faces I don't know and faces I do know, so that's usually a good mix. So I just wanted to tell y'all a little bit about managing the care of Alzheimer's patients. And the truth is, and not just Alzheimer's patients, really any type of dementia, and there are some of the dementias that, you might get a little different behaviors than some of the others. But the truth is, I don't know that I'll tell y'all anything here today that you don't already know. This may be more of a discussion, and even if you have questions or ideas, feel free to raise your hand. We'll also have time at the end to go over questions and stuff like that. So, but hopefully there'll be a few things that will be new to you and will help out. The situation is bad. I don't need to tell you that. It's hard to be a caregiver. So start off by smiling. If there's anything you remember in this seminar or whatever, it's smile and laugh. That's a laughing cow if you can't tell. That's probably going to be the most important thing, and I'm serious, really, it really is. If you can somehow manage to keep a good sense of humor through your caregiving process, it really is probably going to be the most important thing that you can do. However, you can figure out a way to do that, because laughing and smiling raises your serotonin, and serotonin makes you feel good. Another thing that I often had experience with as a counselor with caregivers was a lot of guilt, a lot of feeling like you could do more in certain situations. And I think after a while of leading support groups and hearing caregivers talk, I decided that, maybe I think that they, probably not consciously, but somewhere down inside, they kind of have this thing like that it may be their fault that their loved one is this way. And it's just not. And I really don't mean that as a conscious thing, but some of the things they would say, I would kind of want to say, like, you've got to realize that you've got an impossible job to do here. All you can do is the best you can, and it's not your fault that this person came in and contracted this illness. That's the Surgeon General's warning on caregiving. That is fake. Don't go into caregiving for the money. Most likely, you are going to lose money over the caregiving process. Caregiving is like buying a horse for horse racing. I've heard this said with horse racing is if you want to make a small fortune in horse racing, start off with a big fortune. That's what caregiving is about. Some tips from the National Family Caregivers Association. Caregiving is a job, and respite is your earned right. Reward yourself with frequent breaks. Watch out for signs of depression, and don't delay in getting professional help when you need it. If somebody offers to help, it's a good idea to, first of all, accept the offer, and somewhere along the way, in all the spare time that you have, make a list of things that you often find that it'd be cool if somebody else could do for you. And just have it ready, and if not in your pocket, in your head, and have them, tell them, I really could use somebody to take the laundry to the laundromat, or to just come over and do the laundry, or feed the dog, or something like that. Just things maybe that are practical things that can leave you more time for caregiving. We're going to talk about respite, but definitely if they're willing to come in and spell you for a few hours with taking care of your loved one, that's definitely something good, because it gives you time to hopefully go out and do something that's fun for yourself, and not just going to the bank and getting errands done. Educate yourself about your loved one's condition, how to communicate effectively with doctors. Doctors know a lot, but they might not know a lot about your particular situation. Doctors tend to know a lot about the brain and maybe behavior, and certainly medicine, and how that affects certain attributes of behaviors of Alzheimer's patients, but that may not necessarily fit into, or that may not be enough knowledge to adequately get what you need from your doctor because of your patient's situation. A lot of times I see caregivers going in with their loved one that they're taking care of to the doctor, and I often would tell them, if you're going to do that, it's probably a good idea to try to have a conversation, just at least a quick conversation with the doctor ahead of time, or the doctor's, assistants, or the nurses, or whoever you can, just to let them know, hey, he's not going to answer everything correctly, and he may tell you everything's fine when it's not. And just make sure that they remember that this person has some type of dementia. And that can be very helpful, because in a busy doctor's office, they can forget that, oh, yeah, this is the dementia patient. And so there's a difference between caring and doing. Be open to technologies and ideas that promote your loved one's independence. If there's something that helps them to do things on their own, if there are things they can do, let them do those things to help them to be as independent as possible. That's going to be very, very reduced, but it kind of helps build their confidence and self-esteem if there's things that they can do. Things like the thing that comes to mind now is just any kind of memory aids, the Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday pill thing, if that works. Sometimes it doesn't. Any kind of I've fallen and I can't get up device. Anything like that can help them to be as independent as possible. Try to get that an alarm that lets you know if a door has opened that you don't want to be open, that kind of thing. Trust your instincts. Most of the time, they'll lead you in the right direction. I've heard that your instincts or your gut feeling is correct 53% of the time. And I kind of liked that stat. I have no idea if it's true or not. My sources are not necessarily credible, but it didn't sound like something that was, made up. It's 53%. It's not like they said 88% or something like that. Of course, I've also heard that 67% of statistics are made up on the spot. So I do know from my experience, your gut instinct is often a good thing to follow. And caregivers often do a lot of lifting, pushing, and pulling. Be good to your back, your knees, and those things whenever you can. Grieve for your losses, and then allow yourself to dream new dreams. You may have to put dreams and plans on hold during this process, and try to allow yourself to take baby steps towards your dreams and your goals when you're so busy as a caregiver. And grieve your losses. Take time every now and then to feel sorry for yourself. There's nothing wrong with that. Just don't wallow in it. You're going to miss out on a lot of things, and that's not right. But it is the situation you're in now. So you're going to miss coffee with friends, and you're going to not be able to go to the Kiwanis meetings, things like that every time. And so seek support from other caregivers. There's great strength in knowing you are not alone. And support groups are a great way to do that. Stand up for your rights as a caregiver and a citizen. If you're the type who can feels good going in front of an audience and speaking, or going in front of a congressman and lobbying, then do that. But I might put a caveat here into maybe do that after you are a retired caregiver, unless you just have the means to do it during the caregiving process. Believe in yourself, trust your instincts, that gut feeling that I talked about before. Protect your health. That's akin to the be good to your back and your knees. And it is very much true that you aren't going to be any good to your loved one if you're not healthy, and or if you're not here. And so your health is something that's got to be taken care of, just as if you were a mom taking care of a kid. You've got to be healthy enough to do that. This is akin to taking care of a child in a lot of ways. And so if you're not up to the task, then somebody else is going to have to step in and do it. So reach out for help, more support group talk, more asking for specific tasks that people can do. But this is a good time, if you're not the assertive type, to try to strengthen those skills. Try to get respite whenever you can. Someone to come in and sit with your loved one. Agencies like the Alzheimer's Project can a lot of times place a volunteer to give you a few hours once a week or something, and use as many resources as you can. Speak up for your rights. I've mentioned that already, but if you have the means to do that and get the awareness out there about dementia, do that. And if you can't while you're caregiving, do it later. This is, I used to call it pseudo-wiseness. Now I call it more wiseness. I call it pseudo-wiseness. Wiseness didn't sound good. We've slipped away from the National Family Caregivers Association into just things I think. Stand back. Do some meta-observation at times. A lot of times you can get so into the caregiving process that you're almost just putting out fire after fire after fire. If there's ever time and you have the ability to kind of step back and just look at the whole thing from a bird's eye view, that can help you to make plans better, to keep your life from being fire putting out every 5 minutes, If you can kind of step back, and I don't know if any of y'all have taken the Powerful Tools for Caregivers course. This is something they often talk about, just making plans and trying to structure your life so that you'll have something in place when emergencies happen, because emergencies don't make appointments, and stepping back and looking at things from kind of a bird's eye view is a good way to do that. That's the part of it that's the plan. The marathon, you've probably heard you're running a marathon, not a sprint, so don't forget the type of race you're running. You're going to have energy down the road, so it may be a good time to, if you've got the ability to spend some money, it may be a good time to do that, to get some care in the beginning stages. Did I wait too long to push something? I see that they have it, but I don't have it. But I can look up there and go back. Balance, if you can try to keep, if you think about your life as, and your three main resources as energy, money, and time, just kind of picture a dashboard with gauges, and there's the time gauge, the money gauge, and the energy gauge. And those are going to be your three general areas of resources. Try not to ever let one of those get below, a quarter of a tank if you can. Sometimes you're going to find that you have more money than time. Sometimes the other way around. And to kind of keep your stress level low, if you can keep those three gauges balanced as well as possible, then I think you'll probably get through the caregiving process easier, because we are at different stages in those resources at different times in our lives. The 4-hour rule. I usually get laughed at for this one, but there is a logic behind it. You sleep 8 hours, you work 8 hours, sort of. So that leaves 8 hours. Well, it seems only fair to split that if you're caregiving, 4 hours for your loved one and 4 hours for you. If you can possibly do it, at least shoot for 4 hours of me time a day. Probably you're not going to be able to make it, but if you shoot for the stars, you might land on the moon, and that's pretty good. So I like to think about things that way, because I think that's probably a good way of trying to think about yourself as much as you think about your loved one. And if you can possibly get respite to fill in those hours, someone who can come in and spell you, even maybe it's not every day, but 2 times a week or whatever, try to do that. And then sometimes accept and hang on. Things might be tough, but life tends to balance itself out. I don't know if that's true. It seems like it. Just accept and hang on really hard. Force balance. Anybody who's ever worked in the administrative world and has to turn in statistics to some governing body is probably familiar with this, whether they admit it or not. Sometimes you have to force balance. So maybe it's not a good time to be volunteering right now, or maybe it's not a good time to keep the house as clean as you used to, and just try to not. It may not be a good time to be giving to charity, because you may need that money down the road. So whereas you may have given to a charity in the past, you might have to kind of cut back on that, because you may be a charity in a few years when your loved one has to go into a nursing home, let's say, or assisted living, even maybe more so. And support groups, intra-boat communication, preferable to inter-boat. In other words, when you're in a stressful situation, it's nice to know that there's people in the same boat with you. Sometimes find those people and talk to them. Not only does it give you a chance to get feelings out and just release that stress. It also is a good way to pick up tips and practical advice, things like that. So, nobody's perfect. Everybody screws up. Don't expect that. You're going to do it. And you're going to do it sometimes, and it's going to be big things. I mean, I'm not talking about little things. There's going to be times where you make decisions and you do the best you can with the knowledge you have at the time, and everything goes haywire, and it's not necessarily your fault. It's just that's how things go sometimes. So you're probably going to go to the grocery store and be like, I need to go to the grocery store, but I really don't want to leave him alone. And you know what? He's been pretty good lately. I'm going to go on and do it. And then you get a call while you're in aisle 6, and they say that your husband is selling insurance down the street, but he hasn't had that job for years, and now he doesn't have any clothes on. And those things are going to happen, and it's going to make the news. And that's going to happen. Just tell the reporter that Pobody is nerfic, and everybody screws up. And, so. The new paradigm. It's also true that you're going to have to think of the person you love in a new paradigm, and that's not easy to do for a lot of reasons. One thing is we love the person. Counted on for emotional support for 60 years, or maybe it's someone who we have a difficult time thinking of them as vulnerable and helpless because they went to work and supported us for however many years. And there will be elements of that person still there. And in the early stages of the disease, there will be a lot of them that's still there, but there may be significant portions of their personality, their functioning, that's not going to be there anymore. And you do have to sort of step back and realize, this is not, my dad's not completely like he used to be. He doesn't have the abilities he used to have. And sometimes I'm going to have to make him think he's in charge when he's not in charge. And I'm going to have to take time to mourn the loss of a companion that I've been married to for 40 years, because they're not going to be able to be my companion. I'm not going to be able to talk to them maybe about my day at work anymore, or my feelings, because they just can't provide support back. And anyway, most people get to the new paradigm. I think it's better to get there, to think of your loved one in a new paradigm as early as possible and as often as possible. Overview of dementia disorders. This is taken from basically the American Psychological Association's diagnostic manual. And this is the diagnosis for Alzheimer's disease, or actually for dementia. And there are dementias due to Alzheimer's, dementias due to Lewy body, dementias due to some kind of intoxication. So really, this is the way that a psychiatrist is going to diagnose dementia. And I'll get into a little bit more about the difference there. Development of multiple cognitive deficits manifested by both of these next things. Memory impairment. We'll get more into memory impairment as we go on, but I think that's something you are probably familiar with. And then one of the following cognitive problems. Aphasia, in other words, an inability to use language as well as you used to be able to, especially nouns. Nouns really go early, it seems like. And so you may have to fill in gaps for someone. And a lot of times, if you know them pretty well, you're the one who can fill in those nouns better than somebody who doesn't. I've noticed that too. Apraxia, this is just the inability to carry out motor activities despite the fact that you can move your arm. For some reason, part of the brain has now got a deficit in it that they can do this, but they can't pick up the phone and put it to their ear. They just kind of freezing. A lot of times freezing is something that they do because they can't figure out how to do that task that might have been so simple earlier. Agnosia, not knowing, failure to recognize or identify objects despite intact, eyesight, hearing, and things like that. That very similar to aphasia, but that has to do more with the objects. And disturbance in executive functioning. We have, as human beings, a big frontal cortex, and our brain, that part of our brain, does so much of really what makes us human. I mean, all the things that animals don't do that well as us. Planning, sequencing, organizing, knowing when it's appropriate to do this and when it's not appropriate to do this. Being able to say, what the similarity is between an elm, a spruce, and an oak, or an apple and an orange. All those things are things that we do with that frontal portion of our high frontal portion of our brain. And unfortunately, that's kind of the last part of our brain to form. It seems to be the first part of the brain that starts suffering with most dementias. And so a lot of those tasks begin to fall away from the person. And that's often why they can't do things and can't function in society as well. And these cognitives are each cause significant impairment. So it's obvious that they are hurting the person. They're not so mild that it doesn't really affect them. And then they don't occur, during the course of some kind of acute delirium, or if it's something that's induced by some type of substance, it persists beyond, the time you would think a withdrawal would have occurred. The 7 stages of Alzheimer's disease, according to the Alzheimer's Association, hopefully we're all in stage 1, because everyone who doesn't have the disease is in stage 1. Stage 2, and I think it'd probably just be easier if I read these. Individuals may feel as if they have a memory loss and lapses, especially forgetting familiar words or names, that aphasia, location of things like keys, eyeglasses, everyday objects. But they're not necessarily evident, maybe not to friends or families, and certainly not to strangers, or including doctors. Stage 3, mild cognitive decline. Alzheimer's or other dementias can be diagnosed in some people here, but not all. Friends, families, or coworkers begin to notice problems. Problems with memory or concentration may be measurable in clinical testing or discernible during a detailed medical interview. If you really sit the person down and talk to them, you'll get the fact that there's some problems there, and that probably they functioned at a higher level at one time. Word, name finding, decreased ability to remember names, performance issues in social or work settings, not being able to integrate what's going on around you, losing, misplacing, decline in ability to plan or organize that functioning, executive functioning. Moderate cognitive decline is a careful medical interview detects clear-cut deficiencies in the following areas. Decreased knowledge of recent occasions or current events. So short-term memory is now getting to be something that's pretty noticeable now. Can't tell you what they had for breakfast this morning. Can't tell you how they got to the hospital or whatever. Had trouble with, moderate math problems like taking 7 away from 75. Decreased capacity to perform complex tasks, like more executive functioning. Can't be counted on to do things that are important, like pay bills or manage finances and that kind of thing. Reduced personal history memory, so now it's beginning to get to where they might not be able to tell you even some long-term memory memory issues that were intact at one time, and the person may begin to sort of withdraw a little bit because they still have a recognition that they are not quite functioning up to speed. Moderately severe cognitive decline. Now we're really getting into the area where a person with dementia is really going to need some help, and maybe even 24-hour supervision. Major gaps in memory and deficits in cognitive functioning emerge. Some assistance become essential. At this stage, individuals may be unable to, during a medical interview, to recall important details like their current address, their telephone number, the name of their college or high school, the president. That's often one that you hear the doctors ask them about. Have trouble with less challenging mental arithmetic, 40s, taking 4s from 42s from 220. Need help choosing proper clothing. And they may still have substantial knowledge about themselves and know their own names of people that they're around a lot and have known for a long time. And they usually can do things like go to the bathroom and feed themselves, at least eat from a plate, at this time still. And then stage 6, it gets worse. Significant personality change may come up in this time. They may not quite act the same way and do things appropriately in public, whereas they would at one time in the past. most awareness, they lose most awareness of recent experience and events as well as their surroundings. Personal history is recalled imperfectly. They generally still know their own name at this stage, but they might forget the name of their spouse or primary caregiver and may even have trouble knowing who that person is, and may just have an idea that they know that this is someone that I'm supposed to be with or that helps me. Supervision for a lot more things, putting on clothes. They might put their pajamas on over their daytime clothes or shoes on the wrong feet. Disruption of their normal sleep. They have problems where they get their circadian rhythm kind of off, and even though it's bright outside, they may decide it's time to go to bed, or vice versa. They may decide it's time to wake up at 2 a.m. Actually, that's the one you really think about the most. And incontinence becomes a real problem here. And suspiciousness and delusions. Your loved one is going to, at one time or another during the caregiving process, accuse you of stealing their money in some way or another, and that's just going to happen, even though they may know that you're kind of somebody that takes care of them. And so there may be kind of a dichotomy at times where they know that you're their friend and they can't live without you somewhere on a very deep level, but also they're paranoid. They think you're out to get them or you're stealing their money or whatever because you're the person there and often in their eyesight, basically. And wandering becomes a problem here. They might have repetitive behaviors because you get to where you can't do just a whole lot of things. You tend to start doing the same thing over and over. So it may be things simple as pacing or hand wringing. I can remember giving patients toilet paper rolls just to let them shred it because it seemed to give them something to do and seemed to make them less anxious. And if you're a volunteer for the Alzheimer's Project, it's very important to clean all the toilet paper shred up after you leave for your session. And stage 7 is very significant, very severe. I mean, this is when someone is really, really unable to maybe talk, maybe walk, or at least walk independently. They may not, in fact, very likely will not have much ability to know who you are, and may kind of be what we often, refer to as, patients who take antipsychotics for a long time and are very heavy doses. They get to where they have kind of that look, to where they're just kind of there, but they're not there. And and then some very important physical functions begin to fade away, and swallowing is one of the last ones usually, but not necessarily. It doesn't necessarily follow an exact order, and that's a very important one because they often at this stage aspirate on food or liquid or whatever, and that can lead to pneumonia, which is very serious for a dementia patient. Other problems, we've kind of gone over this: judgment sequencing, hallucinations, delusions. Sometimes you see the hallucinations or delusions a little bit more in Lewy body dementia, and so that's one of the ways they kind of distinguish the diagnosis a lot of times for things like Lewy body or to a lesser extent Pick's disease, or at least the hallucinations to a lesser extent. But Lewy body dementia, people often will see things that aren't there, and those things are causing some type of distress a lot of times. I can remember one man who had pretty good memory and in a lot of ways could function pretty well, but he was convinced that there were little men in the trees and they were not good people. They were something harmful out there. But a lot of ways you might talk to him, and if you didn't talk to him very long, you would think like, maybe he's not demented. Maybe he's just been this way his whole life. Maybe he's got schizophrenia. But if you talk to their family, they'll say, no, he was, he worked for 45 years at whatever printing and, kept a job and that kind of thing. loss of motor skills, executive functioning, personality changes might come along. Some problems, behaviors seen in people with Alzheimer's disease or fraternity brothers. As I was going over these, I realized, yeah, this is taking me back to college, and you'll see as we go along with the various ones. Anxiety, wandering, pacing, repetitive speech or actions, undressing, that was one, screaming, that was one, incontinent, hopefully not, but sometimes, uncooperativeness, nutrition problems, inappropriate sexual behavior, of course that was one, paranoia, hallucinations, delusions, disorientation, hostility, and catastrophic reactions. A lot of times something can happen that's really just a little thing and they just get really blown up over it. And so a lot of times that's one of the reasons they'll say, like, for you to stay as calm as possible, because you never know when their anxiety is going to really peak. Okay, enhancing interactions. This is where you get to really the behavior management. This is one that's an old tried and true, distract, divert. I'm thinking here about like what you can do when you have the person in the room with you to make your life as either a caregiver or a volunteer somewhat livable and enjoyable still. No matter how many times you've had the conversation, pull out the photo album and let them look through it, even if they don't remember who their grandchildren are or their high school pictures or whatever. It usually will give them something to focus on. Also, you can talk to them about a picture on the wall and, where did you have that taken? Or it looks like some artwork. Did somebody in your family draw this, or did you just like it? And sometimes those may not go anywhere, but a lot of times if you keep coming up with these conversations to have about things in the immediate vicinity or some other way to distract them, it can get them away and buy you 20 minutes of them not wanting to take the imaginary car to get the oil changed that you don't need to do right now. Small talk. One thing that dementia patients often can do is small talk, so the weather is really good. Especially if you're not familiar with this individual, again, like if you're volunteering or doing respite, small talk is usually something that they can do and that you can kind of stick to, and you may be doing it longer than you would with the guy in the elevator, So it may be that you talk about the weather in great detail and repeat a lot of the same sentences over and over. Therapeutic fibbing. Withholding information or maybe telling little white lies, and this is something that some people aren't comfortable with, and that's fine, but it really will make your life a lot easier. And I even, kind of got to where I was trying to teach our volunteers almost method acting and to make it more believable. You might not just say that, no, that's not the case, or tell the little white lie, because when we tell lies, most of us are kind of uncomfortable with that, and you can almost look at a person who's telling a lie and tell they're telling it when you can't hear them talking, when you turn the mute button on. We give off nonverbals when we do that, and they can still pick up on those nonverbals real well. That's why you sometimes have to do the whole method acting thing. If they want to take the car to get the oil change down at Mike's Auto Repair, which has been closed for 20 years, and the car they're talking about is also not functioning, and you know that you can't take the car down there, and they are really going to be upset. They're harping on this. They want to do it really bad. You may have to go as far as to say, like, well, Mike's is often busy. I drove by there earlier, and there was a lot of cars. It would probably be a good idea if we call him just to make sure, because I don't want to have to get up and go out there and... Hey, Mike, this is Brooks Johnson. I was just calling because Ted was wanting to bring the oil in, the car in to get the oil changed today. Okay. 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 Well, 10 o'clock tomorrow morning, then we will see you then. He says he can't do it today. First he can take it is 10 o'clock. Okay, you may have to continue with this. No, we're not going to take it to Walmart because you know how Walmart is. They won't tell you that the work is finished until you've been in the store for an hour and have spent more money or something like that. So you may have to keep on with this. And this kind of brings us into our next tactic, which is live in their reality. When they bring something new up, pretend that that is how things are, and then do what you would do in that situation. And in addition to doing what you would do in that situation, still remember that this is not really reality, and try to write it the way you want it to go. So that's kind of what I was doing with the car going to Mike's Auto Repair. You know, step into their reality. What will you do when there are little men in the trees outside? You know, well, you may have to be like, oh, you know, that's not good. Should we check it out? You know, I mean, I tell you what, I'm a little better on my feet than you are. Let me go out there and check it out, you know, and just walk outside, walk back in, and, you know, okay, I do see what you're talking about, and they are a little scary. And to tell you the truth, I'm not completely sold, but I think that they are not trying to hurt us at all. They're like just hanging around and watching. I really don't think, because, I mean, they didn't come after me, whatever. You know, but live in their reality. And most of the times it's not going to be something bizarre like men in trees, but you'll be more often having to deal with things that are kind of day-to-day things. And a lot of times you might spend more time this way, but less energy, less stress, because you're giving them no option when you write the delusion the way you want it to go, but that option is not your fault. So it's not that I am saying to Ted, I'm not going to take you down to Mike's Auto Repair. It's ridiculous. That car is not even working. It's Mike's fault, because he's got a bunch of cars and business there now, and he can't do it at 10 o'clock in the morning, so what's Ted going to say? He's going to be a little stumped there, and then, you know, be ready for what Ted says next. So you can do it to where you're not the one to blame and they're not mad at you. So blame anyone else. The doctor is often a good person to blame. The police sometimes. Repetitive questioning. Just some ideas that I've had in the past and I've heard other people talk about. You know, if there's a question that they ask over and over and you're really, really sick and tired of this, for one thing, if you can, you may leave the room. You know, they may not have to be with you in the room all the time. But you also may give them a card with the answer to that question on it. I'm not sure the card even necessarily has to have the answer to that question, but that's a good place to start. And then maybe throw in something like, I love you, because a lot of times the question they're asking is really, what they're saying is, I'm anxious and I want you to fix this anxiety. And something like a simple, you know, I sure do love you. Or I'm taking care of it. I'm taking care of it. Brooks is taking care of it. Maybe even be better if they know who Brooks is, because I'm is a little too vague. But just something that when they look at it, and this is assuming they can still read, or ever could read for that matter, but this is something that if they are able to do that, that can, might reduce the questioning. If it reduces it by 20%, that's significant. Because as little as that seems, anybody who's ever been around somebody who's asking the same question over and over, it really is tough, especially if you're in a group of people, because you feel the need to say something because somebody else may answer the question, then everybody's answering it, and so calm demeanor. I don't know, that's pretty self-explanatory. They're usually already anxious, so be reassuring, and any news that you get, kind of try to take it in stride, even if it's not something that you would necessarily take in stride. You know, if you find out that there is a tornado spotted down the street, you know, you might have to say like, well, you know, it's probably a good thing if we, whatever you do, go to the basement or whatever. The calmer you are, the better it will be. Choose your battles. Oh, this is real important. Especially if you are unfortunate enough to have obsessive compulsive disorder, because that's a thing for a caregiver to have, because, and not just OCD, but just be kind of obsessive in general, because you tend to get on a train that will not stop, and you're thinking this way in a very rigid manner, and this is how your loved one has to be, and this is what your loved one has to do, and this is the time that they have to do it. And you might find out that you are stressing about a lot of things that don't really matter all that much in the grand scheme of things. So you may sometimes have to give up cleaning the house to the point where you can take a nap or do something else, because that is so much more key to your health right now and your ability to continue as a caregiver. If they're doing something and, you know, it's just the least of my worries, just let it go. And if it's not hurting anyone or hurting anything, you know, maybe it even is a good thing. If they're getting into the laundry, you know, it may be that they're going to spit on the laundry and mess it up and just get things out of whack. Well, you know what? You know, it's laundry. You'll figure something out, you know. So, there's the old go with your gut again. I'm very repetitive, but that's good. This was really pertinent when we had volunteers, because a lot of times they want us to tell them what to do in every situation, and boy, you just can't tell them that because you just don't know. And, you know, you really are going to have to improvise sometimes. We couldn't ever tell them everything that would happen, and you're going to work your creative bone. This job or privilege of caregiving is going to cause you to become more creative, and especially if you do the things like the living in their realities and things like that. But even if you don't do therapeutic fitting, you're going to have to be creative in how you come up with solutions that work for you. Some of the solutions that work for somebody else too may not work for you. So, see there, I told you I'm repetitive. Keep a good sense of humor. The most important thing that you'll learn in this seminar is what? Smile. And laugh. Very good. Just some specifics that I found helpful. Some of these were specifics I found helpful with my Aunt Lucille, who, how am I doing on time?
You're good.
Okay. Aunt Lucille used to have terrible hearing, like one of the worst hearing deficits, I think, that you could have, but still good enough that she felt like she could socialize. And so my Aunt Meiji would take her to somewhere like Applebee's. And one time she took her there, and Aunt Lucille was sitting with this lady kind of right in her line of sight who was extremely large. And Aunt Lucille really never had a lot of, I think, what you would call tact, but it was really gone by the time she was 7 years into dementia. And so she just kept saying in that loud, shrill voice, "My goodness, that lady is fat. My goodness, that lady is fat." And it wasn't quite that quick. It would be like, "Yeah, Mama, yeah, that's right. And you'd go on and she'd eat some green beans, and my goodness, that is a fat lady." So there would be 15, maybe even 15 minutes between it. But luckily, according to my aunt who was taking care of her, the lady was very gracious and understood. And isn't it nice when you run into those people out in the world? Some of the little perks you're going to get as a caregiver is the times when you run into a stranger who is aware of your situation and who is nice to you, and that's sometimes those are the best parts. If they're wandering, Is it a chance for you to take a walk? Maybe do that. Maybe play some soothing music. Give them something to play with that gets them off of the wandering. If they're wandering around the house, maybe it doesn't matter, as long as they can walk pretty well. Inability to remain quiet, soothing music, those ocean things that you can get on like CD or something like that are real good if you can get those and hike them through the whatever system. Restlessness, fidgeting, something to play with. A tackle something is good. That might be a good time to give them a really good feeling blanket or something like that. And hallucinations, sound relaxed and confident. Tell them you'll take care of whatever it is. And they appreciate that a lot. And a lot of times, that's as far as you have to go is just, oh, okay, again? Okay, I'll take care of it. And then, right, hallucination the way you want to go. I said that I would tell you about the difference between dementia. Let me see if I'm through here. Oh, well, one more, I guess. Delusions go along with it if it's not harmful. I've said that. How do you do an impossible job? The best that you can. You are doing an impossible job. I mean, it's impossible to live up to the expectations that you have of yourself for most caregivers. So it may not be society that's saying that you need to do this job this way. It may actually be you. Sometimes it may be society. And it's requiring more than you can do. You cannot herd squirrels no matter how hard you try. And you're kind of doing that. And so if you're, I always think of the analogy of baseball batters. If you're hitting 300, you're failing 7 out of 10 times, but you're an all-star. So, if you're hitting 300, you're doing pretty good. So, the thing about the dementia is, people often ask me about the difference between that and Alzheimer's. Really, dementia is a set of behavioral symptoms that present because of some physical disorder. That physical disorder may be Alzheimer's, which is defined by something like the plaques and tangles or tau protein or whatever the latest thing is that Time Magazine said. I can't keep up with it. Lewy body dementia is another physical disorder that causes plaques in certain areas of your brain. It's a little different from the way your brain looks when you have Alzheimer's disease. And because the plaques are in certain places, Risperdal is not good to give you, something like that. But the symptoms, the behavioral and cognitive symptoms they present also correspond with that dementia characteristics that I showed you earlier, which is why, if you're really technical about it, your loved one may have dementia due to Huntington's disease, dementia due to Pick's disease, dementia due to Alzheimer's disease, or substance-induced dementia. And so that's kind of what the difference is. It's really technical. It's really not that necessary. More like something for people who work in the field to really know. So that's it. Any questions? Y'all been great.
We have about 6 minutes.
6 minutes. Wow. Try to time it perfectly. Yes, ma'am. I think this is in a printout that you can get at the lead table up there. My whole slide presentation is in there.
Yeah, in the green bag, there was a copy of this material.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and if you don't, I can certainly give them to you. But they have them. They told me they did. So, anybody? Yes, ma'am.
I'm going to be visiting my father.
Uh-huh.
He's taking care of my mother, who's probably about stage 5 or 6.
Right.
And I was wondering if you might have any suggestions for him. My mother thinks that she has always taken a bath and that she has changed her clothes. And any suggestions
she hasn't.
for tricking her into bathing and changing her clothes?
We used to tell people to run the water and maybe put a towel out and make it look like there was a bath situation about to come on. That certainly won't work for everybody, and you know, is probably not going to work most of the time. That's a good one. I've been out of the game too long. I'm trying to think of a reason why someone would take a bath more than once in a day and not be mean. I don't know a lot of words. Degrading or, you know, denigrating. And yes, sir?
One way to do that perhaps is to take her to one of the city pools here in town, and then she has to take a shower to clean off all the chlorine.
There you go. There you go. That's actually pretty good. Yeah,
Or just a pool would work, huh?
I guess, or just a pool, yeah,
Your
anytime.
own if you got one.
Sometimes in the summer, it sounds awful, but kids like to run through a hose.
Yeah.
Sprinkler.
I would say probably this may be, probably not, but let's first just make sure that an everyday bath is not the goal, you know. But
Once a month would be good.
yeah, once a month may be the best you can do. So that's one thought. But the main thing I'm thinking is there a way that we can make somebody have to take another bath that is not insulting, and you know,
Spill something on their clothes.
yeah, or it might just douse them with Gatorade like they just won the Super Bowl. Yeah, I'm thinking that you might be able to say something like, "Well, you know, we worked pretty hard today." It might, you know, and she might not, but
Yeah, I know earlier you and I spoke about this, and I asked you if there was any event that would trigger her to normally take a bath.
yeah,
And maybe a visit. We're going to see your doctor today. Let's get our bath now.
yeah.
Maybe that's the trigger event that you and I couldn't come up
Or get some new soap, something that might
Yeah,
Right.
just anything that is a precursor to a bath.
with. Yeah.
And that actually is another good thing, is to have if you do it in the morning, you can have a planned event. Although she's already thinking she took it. Yeah, I was going to say, if you could possibly,
But again, if you stage the bathroom where the towel's clean and the tub's full and her new clothes are right there, you can almost say, "Oh, I see you are ready for your bath. Why don't we do that since we're on our way to the doctor's office?"
oh, yeah, that's another thing.
You're kind of staging it.
That is a tactic of the living in their own reality. That's another tactic of that, is to say to them something that you want them to believe, even though they didn't say they believed it. So, you know, coming into the room with like I know you like to have a bath, you know, a couple of times a day. So, if you're going to get two in today, it's probably going to be now will be the best time, or something like that. If you say something and with an assumption that they've already told you they believe this, that's a lot of times a good angle to go, because a lot of times even if they never believe that, they might say, "Oh, okay, well, I told him I believe that,"
Yeah, I hear the bathroom.
you know, or something like that, and combine that. This is why support groups are great. Somebody, yes, ma'am.
If you're looking at these stages and you're trying to gauge your loved ones, kind of, are they in 4, 5, 6, and they have a little, you know, maybe a few in 7 and some in 5 and some in 4.
Yeah.
How do you
Well, and it's not terribly,
scientific or?
well, yeah, it's not terribly scientific, and there's a lot of shared. I mean, you probably don't see a lot of, you know, stage 2 and stage 7
Right.
sharing, but definitely 4 to 7 and maybe 3 to 7 even, or any of them that are next to each other. Certainly, there's a lot of going back and forth.
Okay.
So it's really not, you know, it's certainly not something that is written in stone. It's movable, you know, and really the truth is, the times I find the stages most helpful or most necessary even is just when I'm trying to describe to someone else and what it is. And some people use the early, middle, late, and that's fine too. Actually, most people would understand it better if you just said, you know, late, early, middle, whatever. The 7 stages is what the Alzheimer's Association goes by. So, well, yes, ma'am.
Brooks, we've got a client that comes to respite, and he doesn't want to let his wife leave without him. We had a real bad situation last week. Got any advice for us?
So he doesn't like to go like to the respite room.
He doesn't like to be.
Coming, he just doesn't want
Her
his
to
wife
leave.
to leave him. And we tried her going out another door
Yeah.
and going around the building, and he just
And so probably he's still always like, where is she? Where is she? Where is she?
just constantly looking for
He stood beside the car or any car that looks like their car.
Do y'all have anybody volunteer, or is it just one person in the respite room? Because usually I'm thinking like, well, he wants his wife. He wants to find his wife pretty bad.
3 of our guys to give him.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, because I'm thinking, if he wants his wife pretty bad, then we need to go looking for his wife.
Yeah.
But we need to go everywhere that she's not to look for her.
This is when she brings him.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'm thinking like, if he can not put it together enough, going out in the parking lot.
He's still got
He's still
that
got
much.
enough, yeah. Yeah.
A lot of times if they come in and if the person will sit down with them, their wife or their husband will sit down with them, and then she'll nudge him and say, I gotta run to the bathroom, and she'll go to the bathroom, and she comes back and says, well, I gotta run over here a second. And not a long time left, but it gives them enough to go, and then I used to just tell them, because Sandy used to ask me for Ed all the time, and I said, had an appointment, as soon as you get done, he's going to be right back, and look at your watch like you're really trying to figure it out, and they're going to keep an eye out for him, and I'm going to go back and call him that. But by the time you do all this, you say a little bit at a time, all the time, you got them continued on where they're not, because we had several people at St. Paul.
Yeah, I was thinking like,
We've tried that. He's just a real difficult case.
it may be if he's that.
You remember that lady we had when we first started?
Yes. Yes. And
He's
I
like-
remember actually the person who came to my mind was somebody that I think that Judy, y'all had referred to us to the Alzheimer's Project when Judy was at the Memory Disorder Clinic, and she was about as bad of wanting her husband as anybody I could ever think of, and I think we actually finally had to just tell her we couldn't do it, which just I hated to do, because we were using like 2 or 3 of our volunteers on her, and
We're almost
she
to that
just-
point.
Yeah, I mean there are some people that the good thing is there's things that are. There's nothing good about the progression of the disease, but there are silver linings. Zero. There are silver linings, I guess, is the thing. If you have to look for something good and you have to try, as the progression of the disease goes on, one of the things that happen is a lot of times they're less able to do things like this. They're more foolable. So we've got to go. Thank y'all very much.
Just to let you know, the